I was sipping my morning coffee on the porch, the steam rising up into the crisp autumn air, when I saw it happen again. It was a sight that, I have to admit, had become the absolute highlight of my mornings. A shiny silver Mercedes SUV was crawling down the middle of my pasture, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of fading grass and old oak trees. It slowed to a stop at the massive, heavy-duty iron gate I'd installed about 4 months prior. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped a woman in a bright, neon-pink blazer. Let's call her Sheila. Sheila was the self-appointed queen of the newly built subdivision behind my woods, the president of an HOA I didn't belong to, and a woman who believed the world existed solely to be paved over for her convenience. I watched as she wrestled with the padlock, her heels sinking into the mud, cursing at the cold steel that refused to budge. It took her a good 45 seconds of rattling, pulling, and shivering before she finally got the chain loose, dragged the heavy gate open, drove through, stopped again, got out again, and slammed it shut with all the rage of a general who had just lost a war she started. I leaned back in my rocking chair and smiled, taking a long, slow sip of coffee. Because 6 months earlier, this same woman stood on my front porch and told me that my land was just empty space that needed to be utilized for the greater good of her community. She thought a few legal threats, some fancy letterhead, and a fake community vote would scare me into letting her carve a permanent driveway right through the heart of my family farm. She had no idea what was coming. She didn't know that her free shortcut was about to cost her and her precious HOA over $60,000, her reputation, and eventually, the entire existence of her little kingdom. But before we get to the muddy ruin of her ambitions, I need to take you back to where this started, back before the gates and the lawsuits, to when my life was just quiet, simple, and mine. I've lived on this 20-acre parcel for most of my adult life. It belonged to my grandfather first, then my father, and now me. It's a patch of rolling pasture in the foothills, with a patch of dense woods at the back and a gravel driveway that snakes its way up to a farmhouse that creaks in the winter but holds more memories than I could ever count. My wife, Sarah, and I moved in right after my dad passed. Fixing this place up was how I grieved. Every nail I hammered, every fence post I dug, felt like I was having a conversation with him. We valued our privacy above everything. The land sits off a rural county road, and for decades, the property behind us was just wild brush and timber. That is, until the for sale signs went up and the bulldozers arrived. A developer bought the 300 acres behind my woods, and within a year, what used to be a deer sanctuary turned into Oak Creek Estates. Rows of identical beige houses, manicured lawns that looked like AstroTurf, and an HOA that treated rule-breaking like a felony. Now, if you've never lived next to a high-strung HOA, consider yourself lucky. There are the quiet ones that just mow the common areas, and then there are the ones that act like independent nations. Oak Creek was the latter. And Sheila? She was their monarch. I first met her during the construction phase. She drove her crossover SUV right up to my fence line, hopped out with a clipboard, and waved me over like I was an employee who was late for a shift. She was wearing that signature pink blazer, looking at my cows like they were graffiti on a historic building. "You must be the owner of this farm," she said, the word farm dripping with judgment. "I am," I said, tipping my hat. "Name's Elias." She didn't offer her name, just launched right in. "We want this whole community to have a refined aesthetic. Modern. Elevated. We're hoping your property won't hold back the property values of the new homes." That was the first red flag, waving high and bright. But I'm a patient man. I let it slide. Over the next few weeks, Sheila kept showing up. She'd walk the property line, taking notes. Then came the day she mentioned the driveway. I was fixing a latch on the barn when she approached me with a smile that looked like it hurt her face. "Elias," she said sweetly. Whenever she used my name, I knew she wanted something. "Have you ever thought about how wonderful it would be if the community could share a straight, smooth driveway across your field?" I stopped working. "Across my field?" "Yes," she nodded, gesturing with a manicured hand. "It would connect the new subdivision directly to the main county road. Much more efficient than the old access road behind the woods. That path is steep, it erodes easily, and it winds around too much. Your land is flat, open. It's the perfect solution." I blinked slowly. "Perfect for who?" "For everyone," she said. "For the community." "Except me," I replied. She waved that off like my existence was a clerical error. Oh, it's barely an inconvenience. It's just grass, right? You aren't even growing crops on that strip. I told her no. Sarah, my wife, was even more adamant. Do not let them in, she warned me over dinner. You give people like that an inch, they take the whole mile. But Sheila was persistent. A week later, she came back with official papers. The HOA had voted, without me, obviously, to request temporary access across the eastern edge of my pasture strictly for construction vehicles. They claimed the back road was unsafe for heavy trucks. They offered me $200 a month for 12 months, with a written promise to restore the land to its original condition afterward. I looked at the contract. It seemed simple enough. Just a 30-foot strip along the fence line. Temporary. Construction only. And honestly, I was tired of arguing, and the extra cash would cover feed for the winter. Against my better judgment, and against Sarah's warnings, I signed. That was the mistake that almost cost me everything. Within the first week, I looked out my window and saw 3 cement mixers barreling straight through the center of my pasture, nowhere near the agreed-upon strip. They were tearing up sod my grandfather had planted 50 years ago. I stormed out, yelled at the foreman, and called Sheila. She apologized, blamed a miscommunication, and promised it wouldn't happen again. But the tone had been set. For the next 9 months, that temporary strip became a highway. Subcontractors threw trash in my grass. Delivery trucks sped through at 40 miles an hour, kicking up dust clouds that coated my porch. Every time I complained, Sheila offered a hollow apology and reminded me of the greater good. Then came month 10. The subdivision was nearly finished. Families were moving in, and I noticed something strange. The original access road, the one behind the woods that they were supposed to be using, was overgrown. They hadn't touched it in a year. They weren't fixing it. They were ignoring it. I walked out to the edge of my pasture one afternoon to check the fence line, and my stomach dropped. There, planted firmly in my soil, were 2 metal signs. Professional, reflective, green highway signs. Oak Creek Estates, main entrance dash. And underneath it, private residence only. They weren't pointing to a construction site. They were pointing down the strip of land I owned. I found Sheila supervising the planting of some hydrangeas near the property line. Sheila, I called out, skipping the pleasantries. What are those signs doing on my land? She turned, and for the first time, the sweet facade was gone. She didn't smile. She looked at me with a sort of bored pity. Oh, Jack, surely you see that the community has settled into this route. It's safer. It's faster. It's temporary, I reminded her. The contract expires in 2 months. You need to take those signs down and start grading your own road. She let out a short, sharp laugh. Well, actually, the board has voted to designate this as the permanent access point. We've been using it continuously for nearly a year. At this point, we've established a pattern of use. I felt the blood rushing in my ears. A pattern of use. I have a contract that says temporary. She stepped closer, dropping her voice. Google prescriptive easement, Elias. If a community uses a road openly and continuously, it becomes ours. You let us in. You took the checks. At this point, if you try to close it, we'll sue. And the HOA has a much bigger legal budget than a dirt farmer. There it was. The knife in the back. She hadn't just been using the road. She'd been running out the clock, waiting for the moment she could steal it. I went home and told Sarah. She didn't say, I told you so, but she didn't have to. I saw the fear in her eyes. We couldn't afford a massive lawsuit against a 100-home development. The next morning, I drove to town and sat down with an attorney, an old friend named Marcus who specialized in property disputes. He read the contract, looked at the photos, and listened to Sheila's threat. She's bluffing, Marcus said, tossing the file onto his desk. Prescriptive easement only applies if the use is hostile or without permission. You signed a contract granting permission. That kills her argument immediately. It's permissive use. She can't steal what you gave her permission to borrow. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 24 hours. So I can shut the road down? You can, Marcus said. But she's right about one thing. They will sue. They'll file an injunction, claim hardship, drag it out for years just to bleed you dry. If you want to win this without going bankrupt, you need to make them want to leave. How do I do that? I asked. Marcus smiled, a wicked, lawyerly smile. He tapped a paragraph in the contract I had signed. Right here. Clause 4, Section B. The landowner retains the right to secure the property for the safety of livestock and liability protection. It doesn't say you can't gate it. It just says you have to provide them access. I looked at him, and the gears started turning. So if I put up gates, as long as you give them a key, Marcus shrugged. You're just securing your cows. If the gates happen to be heavy, cumbersome, and annoying, well, that's just ranch life. I left his office with a plan that was so maliciously compliant it felt like poetry. I didn't act immediately. I waited until I saw Sheila again. I approached her with a defeated look, hands in my pockets. Sheila, I said, I talked to my wife. We don't want a legal war. If the HOA wants to keep using the road, we won't block you. She beamed. The relief was palpable. She thought she had broken me. I knew you'd be reasonable, Elias. But, I added, I'm bringing my cattle back into that east pasture next week. For insurance reasons, I have to install gates at both ends of the easement. I'll provide keys, of course. She frowned. Gates? Are they automated? No money for electric gates, I said. Just standard steel farm gates. Padlocks. She rolled her eyes. That is incredibly inconvenient. It's compliance, I said, using her own favorite word. Safety first, right? She waved a hand. Fine. Whatever. Just give us the keys. The next week, the gates arrived. I didn't buy the lightweight aluminum ones. I bought the heavy-duty, galvanized steel cattle gates. I installed 2 of them, one right where they entered my land from the main road, and one a quarter-mile down where they crossed into their subdivision. I positioned them perfectly so that a car couldn't just pull up and reach out the window. You had to put the car in park, get out, walk to the lock, wrestle the chain, drag the heavy steel arc through the dirt, drive through, get out again, close it, and lock it. And you had to do it twice. Once to get in, once to get out. The day they went up, I sat on the porch and waited. The first victim was a luxury sedan. The driver didn't even slow down until he saw the steel bars. He honked. Nothing happened. He got out, furious, in his suit and tie. I watched him struggle with the padlock. He got mud on his shoes. He finally dragged it open, drove through, and realized he had to close it behind him or risk violating the agreement I'd sent to every resident. Failure to secure gates resulting in livestock escape places full liability on the HOA. He slammed the gate shut so hard I heard the clang from the porch. Then he drove 300 yards and had to do it all over again. But that was just phase 1. Phase 2 was the cows. I leased my land to a neighbor, Farmer Harris. I told him to move the herd into the east pasture. 38 cows, specifically curious ones. Cows don't care about property values. They care about warm surfaces and salt. Within days, the driveway wasn't a driveway anymore. It was a barnyard. The cows discovered that the gravel held heat from the sun, so they started sleeping on it. Residents would turn onto the strip only to find a wall of beef blocking their path. They'd honk, they'd yell, but the cows would just stare at them with that blank, cud-chewing indifference. Then came the manure. It was everywhere. Shiny BMWs were driving through fresh cow pies daily. The smell wafted into the subdivision whenever the wind shifted. And the complaints started pouring in, not to me, but to Sheila. I heard through the grapevine that the HOA Facebook page was a war zone. Why are we opening gates like it's the 1800s? My car smells like a barn. I was late to work because a calf wouldn't move. Sheila came storming over, pink blazer flapping. This is harassment, Elias. You're doing this on purpose. I'm farming, I said calmly. This is agricultural land. You're the ones who insisted on driving through a pasture. We will sue. Go ahead, I said. But until a judge tells me otherwise, the gates stay locked. It's for the safety of the community. Then, winter arrived. And winter in the foothills is unforgiving. The mud in the pasture froze into jagged ruts. The locks on the gates froze solid. I watched from my warm living room as residents stood out in the sleet, breathing on padlocks, chipping away ice with their car keys, miserable and freezing. The shortcut that Sheila had promised them was now adding 20 minutes to their commute. The mood in Oak Creek Estates shifted from annoyance to mutiny. It culminated on a Tuesday night. I saw headlights bunching up at the first gate. Someone had snapped a key off in the frozen lock. Traffic was backed up onto the county road. Horns were blaring. It was total gridlock. The next morning, I got a visit. Not from Sheila, but from 2 other board members. They looked exhausted. They looked defeated. Elias, one of them said, shivering on my porch. We can't do this anymore. The gates, the cows, the ice. The residents are ready to burn down the clubhouse. I understand, I said, but I can't leave my land open. We know, the man sighed. Look, there's a proposal on the table. A faction of the neighborhood wants to buy the strip. If we own it, we can pave it, fence it off properly, and install electric gates. We want to buy the easement from you. I leaned against the doorframe. This was the moment. I'm willing to sell, I said. Okay, he said, pulling out a checkbook. Sheila said it's worth maybe $5,000 for the acreage. I laughed. A full belly laugh. Gentlemen, you aren't buying dirt. You're buying a developed access road that connects a multi-million-dollar subdivision to the highway. You're buying convenience. You're buying peace of mind. I named my price. $40,000. Their jaws dropped. That's highway robbery. No, I said. That's the price of the headache you've caused me. Take it or leave it. If you leave it, I'm adding a third gate next week. They left angry, but I knew they had no choice. They couldn't use the old back road. It would cost 6 figures to grade and pave it from scratch. They were trapped. 2 days later, Sheila marched up to my porch. She didn't have her clipboard. She didn't have her smile. She looked like she had aged 5 years. We're accepting the offer, she spat out. 40,000. But I want you to know, this is extortion. It's business, Sheila, I said. Just business. We met at the title company the following week. The entire board was there. Sheila sat at the head of the table, refusing to look at me. I signed the deed, transferring that 30-foot strip of mud and misery to the Oak Creek HOA. They handed me a cashier's check for $40,000. As I slid the check into my pocket, the treasurer of the board spoke up. Well, that's done. Now we can finally pave it. Good luck with that, I said, standing up. Sheila glared at me. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, you bought the land. You didn't buy the maintenance. Enjoy the drainage issues. I walked out, leaving them in the conference room. But the best part? The best part happened before I even reached my truck. I heard shouting from inside the room. The board members were turning on her. This was your idea, Sheila. You said this would be free. We just drained the reserve fund for a dirt road. A week later, I received a letter. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was a newsletter from the HOA, forwarded to me by a friend inside. Announcement: resignation of board president. Sheila was out. Dethroned. The queen had been toppled by a muddy road and a couple of steel gates. But here is the twist, the beautiful, ironic twist that still makes me smile every time I look out my window. They own the road now. That meant they were responsible for it. And that spring, we had record rainfall. Because that strip of land sat at the bottom of a slope, the water pooled there naturally. Without my cows stomping it down and absorbing the impact, the road turned into a soup. The HOA had to bring in gravel trucks. They sank. They had to hire engineers. They had to install culverts. They had to build their own fences to keep my cows out, because, surprise, cows don't respect property lines unless there's barbed wire. I watched from my porch as they poured money into that strip. $10,000 for gravel, $12,000 for fencing, another $5,000 for grading. They spent the entire $40,000 they paid me, plus another $30,000 from their reserves, just to make the road passable. Special assessments went out. HOA dues skyrocketed by 40%. The neighborhood was furious. The beautiful, modern aesthetic Sheila had promised was now a gravel money pit that drained their bank accounts every time it rained. And then, the final surrender. About 6 months after the sale, the new board president knocked on my door. He was a nice guy, young, looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Elias, he said, we have a proposition. Oh, we want to know if you'll buy the road back. I stared at him. Excuse me. It's bleeding us dry, he admitted. The maintenance, the liability insurance, the taxes. We made a mistake. We want to sell it back to you. We'll give you a discount. $20,000. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out at the strip of land where a Honda Civic was currently spinning its tires in the mud. No, I said gently. Please, he begged. We'll go back to using the backwoods road. We'll fix it up over time. We just want to be rid of this. You bought it, I said. You voted for it. You bullied me for it. It's yours. Forever. He walked away, head hanging low. Eventually, the HOA crumbled under the financial strain. They dissolved the formal organization and turned into a simple road maintenance agreement, stripping away all the power Sheila used to wield. The road is still there, ugly and expensive, a permanent scar on their budget. Sometimes, I see Sheila driving past. She drives a different car now, something older, less flashy. She never looks at my house. She keeps her eyes glued to the road, dodging the potholes she paid for, navigating the mess she created. I used the $40,000 to renovate my barn and buy a new tractor. Every time I start it up, I think of it as a gift from the queen of the HOA. It just goes to show, folks, land doesn't bend to your ego. And if you try to bulldoze your way through someone else's life, don't be surprised when you end up stuck in the mud you made. So, I have to ask, have you ever dealt with a neighbor who couldn't take no for an answer? Did you bow down, or did you build a gate? Let me know in the comments. I'll be here on the porch, reading them, enjoying the peace and quiet of my farm.